Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 249th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast, and of course, welcome to June. And the new theme for this month is all about pushback, starting with this week, why the pushback? But before we start, have you watched my TEDx talk? It's about the connection between culture, race, and mental health in the workplace. It's something you can watch in your break as it's just 12 minutes long, and the link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. It is bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVESLO. I really hope you enjoy it because it was a labor of love. And if you did, please leave a positive comment on YouTube, share and like. Also, don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter at Diverse Minds UK. So why the theme? Why the pushback? Given that the general election has been called and it was kind of snap, I have to say, there's been so much pushback over the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years around equity, diversity and inclusion, using slanderous words, using the phrase woke in weaponized way, which it wasn't the original intention. So I wanted to talk about this more and get thinking about whether we have a change in government or not. We don't know what it's going to look like. Will the pushback minimize? We don't know. But also really to pinpoint what is the pushback and why is there pushback? So pushback is essentially resistance to new ways of doing things. That could include methodology, trying to shift culture, change in process, procedures, or changes in the workplace. Now, pushback isn't specifically centered on equity, diversity, and inclusion. It could be a new HR system. It could be a new way of raising tickets for IT problems. So it could be around anything. But I just think, given the theme of the podcast being about mental health and inclusion, this is I've really noticed a big pushback in it, and the business has really had to change as a result of that. But I also want to be clear and say that pushback is not the same as asserting rights, which are really important. So if you find a policy does not meet the needs of a particular community, or if there's a new policy and it's not taken into account, for example, how anyone with a visual impairment might access a new service, or it is not fair to people with caring responsibilities, that's not pushback. That's actually critical challenge for the improvement to look at access, inclusion, and accessibility. So pushback is very different to speaking up for yourself. Pushback in this context is a negative mindset and approach to practices and ways of doing things that are actually helpful and useful for individuals, departments, and the organization as a whole. So you'll see the difference when I break it down. And I want to say that I found a really great article about this, and the link is in the show notes. It's Gartner.com's articles on how to navigate pushback to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. But what I really liked about this is the way they broke it down into 3 areas. And I was thinking about this, how can I summarize it? Because I could go on and on about examples, but I think it's very helpful to have it succinctly divided into 3 categories, which the Gartner article does. So first of all, denial. This is not a problem. So now you can see the difference, whereas asserting your rights is going, okay, actually, yes, I can see that maybe we're trying to moving towards a better policy, but we have forgotten about this group and that group and how, there's a caveat here. Whereas denial is, this is not a problem. Why are we talking about this? Disengagement, this is not my problem. So again, if we think about looking at the rights of individuals and groups, that's very different, in terms of asserting your rights. And derailment is, what about other problems, invisible brackets, and I'm not going to do anything about it, but I'm going to palm it on back to you. So pushback is deeply unpleasant, and it means organizations, teams, and individuals can get very stuck in one way of doing things, which again links to groupthink and unconscious bias. And it does really stifle creativity, innovation, and improving things for staff and customers, clients, beneficiaries, etc. I feel part of the problem that we've seen is in national leadership as well. It's been incredibly poor. And I think for me, that's really dripped down. So an example would be Esther McVeigh's comment about rainbow lanyards, so that we must stop rainbow lanyards in the civil service. And I just thought, wow, really, out of all the things that need to be solved. So we've got issues with childcare. We've got, people accessing childcare, people being able to afford childcare. If we think about linking to workplaces, we've got real challenges with people traveling to work and not being able to afford it. We've got 40% of people in this country who access food banks are actually in work. Okay. And then what she's picking on is rainbow lanyards. So I would also say some of the pushback could be distraction. So we've got denial, disengagement, derailment, and distraction. And the one thing that she calls out on national policy, or wants it to be national policy, is a rainbow lanyard. I mean, that to me is such a profound example of pushback. when there are much bigger challenges that need to be solved for the improvement and betterment of different people and communities that then enhance the workplace. So let's look at some of the phrases in the 3 different categories. So denial is it's not a problem at all. So we might see comments like, well, why are we talking about racism? I don't see color. I just care about the person. Or things like, well, we've solved racism now with our listening exercises. Can we just move on and talk about something else? Thinking like, oh, well, there's only one human race. We don't need to divide people up. If women want to progress, they shouldn't have children. Or I treat everyone the same. Disabled staff members aren't going to have a worse time in my team. Well, actually, we don't want to treat everyone the same. We want to make sure they have their workplace adjustments and what they need. So that's some examples. And there are many, many more. And I'm sure you can think of your own. Disengagement, it's not my problem. So things like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. So I'm just going to keep quiet and keep my head down, as opposed to, you know what, I probably am going to make mistakes. I'm going to learn from them and move on and take that learning with me. Well, we're too busy with our work and we shouldn't be spending time on this. We've got to focus on the day to day. So yes, you might think, well, if someone's in a finance processing capacity, what's this got to do with them? And then if we think about financial systems, how people might access them, interface, UX, UI interfaces, and how customers, clients, and beneficiaries might have to or not have to connect with something, that's all part of it. Well, disengagement could also be, well, it's a problem everywhere and it's not unique to our workplace. So, I don't need to do anything about it. I'm not going to engage because it really annoys me and I don't like it and I feel very uncomfortable. Again, not said directly. We live in a post-racist, post-feminist, whatever, insert term here, society. And again, I'm sure you can think of lots of examples there. And finally, derailing. I also call it, and you might have seen it called whataboutery. So things like, recently, I think in the last couple of weeks, Raheem Sterling, he's got these specific scholarships for Black British students in a number of UK universities, and the pushback about what about working class boys then? What's he going to do for them? And when we think about, I'm laughing because I just think, you've got the data, you've got the analytics, you've got the lack of access due to societal barriers for Black students. We know this, there's so much research on this. And that's great. If you want to do something for white working class boys, go ahead. I don't think Raheem Sterling has to do everything for everyone, for example. Or derailing could be, well, race and gender doesn't impact lived experience the way class does. How can you separate that? There's so much there. There's the layers of race, gender, class, disability, etc. Our focus should be on merit and competencies, not handing out opportunities to people. The best person for the job. But as we know, the best person is often the person who has experienced far fewer barriers than others. What about International Men's Day? And in fact, there is an International Men's Day in November. And if organizations choose to celebrate that, they are very welcome to. I have my own particular opinion on that. It feels like every day is International Men's Day. And the pushback around that, the derailing. Or this feels like reverse discrimination / positive discrimination, which we don't have in this country. We never have had. We have positive action, which is about how can we think about barriers and removing them to get people to the door, not letting them in through the door, in effect. And that is actually in our law. So I really hope you're enjoying the content of my podcast and you want to keep up to date. Then why not join my newsletter? When you join my mailing list, you'll receive a copy of my white paper on inclusive language and mental health. And that link is bit.ly/ILMHCK. So in this series, I'm going to be looking at the variety of pushback statements. So we've looked at the 3 key areas, but I'm going to delve deeper into the different statements around them and how to challenge that. That will include from moaning about budgets, we don't have the money for this, irritation and anger about doing what's useful, and creating helpful and profitable, professionally engaged workplaces. So that's going to be the topic for the next 3 weeks. And if you'd like to know more about how I could help you, particularly with keynotes, workshops, or team coaching sessions, don't forget to drop me a line at Layla, Leyla, at diverseminds.co.uk. And remember, pushback is very real. It often comes from a place of fear or perceived power imbalance. It is destructive. It stops innovation. It stops profitability. It stops connection within to create a professional workplace community. And you have to think strategically about how to shift it. And I really hope you've enjoyed the show. And if so, please write me a review on Apple, Spotify, or whatever you listen to your podcast from. And don't forget, I'd love to hear from you as listeners. And to make this super easy, I've created a place where you can leave me a voice note anonymously or leave your name called SpeakPipe. The link is in the show notes and I'll give it to you here. It is bit.ly/SPKPDMP. And the resources for this episode are the Gartner article and also an Indeed article, Indeed.com, addressing manager pushback, which was also really useful. So I hope you'll join me in this series, and take care, everyone, and I hope to connect with you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.